I invited my entire family to my company's grand opening, but I sat alone in an empty office while they celebrated my brother. When Mom texted demanding I give him my profits, I triggered a financial trap they never expected. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The grandfather clock in the corner of my newly leased architectural design office chimed softly, each of the 8 hollow strikes feeling like a physical blow to my chest. It was 8:00 p.m. The grand opening of my firm, a dream I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into for the better part of a decade, was officially a spectacular, agonizing failure. I stood in the center of the expansive, open concept room, the polished concrete floors reflecting the warm, meticulously designed ambient lighting. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of a celebration that had never materialized. A long table draped in crisp white linen held an array of untouched, artisanal hors d'oeuvres that had cost me a month's worth of personal grocery budgets. Crystal champagne flutes stood at attention in perfect, gleaming rows, completely empty. The air smelled of fresh paint, expensive floral arrangements, and profound disappointment. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed the fabric of the tailored emerald green dress I had bought specifically for this occasion. I had imagined this night for years. I was 34 years old, and after surviving on ramen, working grueling 80-hour weeks at a soul-crushing corporate firm, and denying myself every vacation, luxury, and day off, I had finally built something of my own. I had mailed the heavy, gold-embossed invitations out 6 weeks in advance. My mother, Margaret, had RSVP'd for herself. My father, my aunts, my uncles, and my brother, Derek, they had all promised to be here. But the room was entirely, suffocatingly empty. A profound wave of physical illness washed over me. My stomach churned, and a tight, sharp pain bloomed behind my eyes. I felt incredibly fragile, as if the slightest breeze could shatter me into a million irreparable pieces. I walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city streets below. Cars moved in endless streams of red and white lights, people going about their lives, entirely unaware of the absolute devastation occurring in this beautifully decorated room. Then, the sharp, cheerful ping of my cell phone shattered the heavy silence. My heart leaped into my throat. For a brief, pathetic second, hope flared in my chest. Maybe they were just late. Maybe there was massive traffic. Maybe they were lost. I rushed over to my desk and snatched up the phone, my thumb frantically swiping across the screen to unlock it. It was a text message from Margaret. I stared at the glowing words, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity and cruelty of the sentences on the screen. The text read, "Hey sweetie, so sorry we couldn't make it to your little office thing. We're all over at Derek's housewarming party. It was a surprise. Anyway, we need to talk tomorrow about your profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut now that you're a CEO to help with his new mortgage. Call me in the morning. Zox." I read the message again, and again. The words blurred together as tears hot with humiliation and rage finally spilled over my eyelashes. They weren't lost. They hadn't forgotten. They had actively chosen to abandon my life's greatest achievement to attend a housewarming party for a home my 31-year-old brother hadn't even paid for himself. And the sickening cherry on top, the demand for my profits. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from the screen made me want to scream until my throat bled. The silence of the room was no longer just empty, it was mocking. The untouched champagne flutes seemed to glint with malice. The betrayal was worse than any physical diagnosis, worse than the exhaustion in my bones. It was a fundamental shattering of my reality. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. For a long time, I just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer weight of the rejection. The vibrant energy I had felt earlier in the day had been completely drained, leaving behind a hollow, aching shell. My feet, clad in the expensive heels I had bought to look the part of a successful founder, throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Slowly, mechanically, I began the agonizing process of dismantling the party that never was. I grabbed a thick black trash bag from the utility closet, the plastic rustling loudly in the quiet space. I walked over to the catering table. I picked up a delicate, meticulously afted smoked salmon canapé and stared at it. It represented so much sacrifice, so many skipped meals and canceled plans, just to afford this night. With a heavy sigh, I dropped it into the trash bag. One by one, I swept the expensive food into the garbage. The sound of the food hitting the bottom of the plastic bag was a deeply depressing drumbeat. My movements were sluggish, weighed down by an invisible anchor of sorrow. I carefully wrapped the unpopped champagne bottles and placed them back into their cardboard boxes. Every action felt like I was dismantling a piece of my own soul. When the office was finally returned to a pristine, sterile state, I collapsed into the ergonomic chair behind my new desk. The leather felt cold. I picked up my phone again. The text from Margaret was still there, a digital monument to my insignificance in my own family. I couldn't just let it sit there. The anger, hot and venomous, was beginning to burn through the thick fog of my sorrow. I dialed her number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when she answered. "Hello," Margaret's voice floated through the speaker, accompanied by the booming bass of pop music and a chorus of raucous laughter. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, cracking under the emotional strain. "You're at Derek's." "Hazel, oh, sweetie, yes, I texted you. Can you hear me? It's so loud in here." Margaret practically yelled over the music. She didn't sound apologetic. She sounded thrilled. "I saw your text," I said, gripping the edge of my desk so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mom, you RSVP'd to my launch. The whole family did. I catered food for 50 people. I waited for 2 hours." "Oh, Hazel, don't be dramatic," Margaret sighed, her tone instantly shifting from celebratory to deeply annoyed. It was the same tone she used when she returned a dress she had already worn. "It's just an office. You'll be there every day. Derek just got the keys to his new house. It's a huge milestone. A young man becoming a homeowner, that's a real accomplishment. We had to be here to support him." "An accomplishment?" I choked out, a bitter, hysterical laugh escaping my lips. "Mom, he doesn't even have a job. He's an aspiring influencer. And my office, my business, this is my life's work." "Which brings me to my text," Margaret plowed on, completely ignoring my distress. "Now that you have this fancy company, Derek and I were talking. He has a mortgage now, Hazel. Real expenses. Property taxes, landscaping, maintenance. He needs a stable income stream, and since you're family, it only makes sense that you share a percentage of your business profits with him. Think of it as investing in your brother's future. We can draw up the paperwork this weekend." I sat in stunned silence. The sheer audacity was paralyzing. She wasn't asking for a loan. She was demanding a permanent cut of the company I had built with my own 2 hands to fund a lifestyle my brother had done nothing to earn. "I'm not giving Derek my profits, Mom," I said, my voice trembling but finding a new, harder edge. "Hazel, do not be selfish tonight of all nights," Margaret snapped sharply. "We are celebrating. We will discuss your financial obligations to this family tomorrow. Goodbye." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. The tears had stopped completely. In their place was a cold, crystalline clarity. They viewed me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a resource to be harvested. They saw my success only as a vehicle to fund Derek's delusions. I looked around my beautiful, quiet office. They thought they held all the cards. They thought my lifelong desire for their approval would force my hand. But as I sat there in the quiet of my new empire, a slow, dark realization settled over me. They were arrogant, and in their arrogance, they had forgotten one crucial, legally binding detail about Derek's shiny new estate. To understand the sheer magnitude of Margaret's audacity, you have to understand the decades of history that built the foundation of this exact moment. The dynamic in our family had always been rigidly, irrevocably set. Derek was the sun, and I was merely a satellite whose only purpose was to ensure he continued to shine. While I had spent my 20s working 3 jobs, tutoring architecture students by day, drafting blueprints for a cheap firm by night, and waiting tables on the weekends, Derek was finding his passion. This involved a 3-year backpacking trip across Europe, a brief, disastrous stint attempting to launch a luxury sneaker brand, and countless hours recording videos for a YouTube channel that peaked at 400 subscribers. And who funded this endless parade of expensive passions? Margaret. My mother, Margaret, was a woman who styled herself as a lifestyle consultant, a nebulous, self-appointed title that essentially meant she spent my father's meager pension, and often my own emergency savings, on maintaining an illusion of upper-class grandeur. She was 65, but dressed like a woman 20 years younger, her hair always immaculately blown out, her wrists heavy with expensive, chunky jewelry bought entirely on credit. She possessed a polished, disingenuous charm that allowed her to manipulate almost anyone into doing exactly what she wanted. Her favorite manipulation tactic was guilt, and I had always been her prime target. When I was 22, Margaret convinced me to empty my college savings account to bail Derek out of a massive credit card debt he had accumulated buying recording equipment. "He's an artist, Hazel," she had cooed, her perfectly manicured hand resting over mine. "He just needs a little runway. You're so smart, you can easily make that money back. Don't you want to see your brother succeed?" I had relented. I always relented. Because underneath the resentment, there was a desperate, pathetic inner child hoping that if I just gave enough, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough, Margaret would look at me with the same unadulterated adoration she reserved for Derek. But it was never enough. As I began to climb the ranks in the architectural world, her interest in my life shifted from dismissive to uncomfortably intrusive. She began asking highly specific, pointed questions about my finances. When I mentioned I was thinking of starting my own firm, her eyes had lit up with a terrifying, predatory gleam. "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetie. You know, a business is a huge liability. You should really consider putting my name on the LLC documents, just as a silent partner for security. And maybe Derek could be your marketing director on payroll." I had managed to dodge those requests, thanks entirely to the intervention of my best friend and the brilliant corporate attorney who had helped me navigate my launch, Scarlett. Scarlett had seen through Margaret's polished veneer years ago. "Your mother isn't looking out for your security, Hazel," Scarlett had warned me over coffee just last month. "She's looking for a backdoor into your bank accounts. Keep her entirely locked out." I had listened to Scarlett. I had built the walls around my business thick and high. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the sleek, modern ceiling of my office. Margaret's demand for profit sharing wasn't a sudden whim. It was the culmination of a lifelong strategy. She saw my firm as Derek's new piggy bank. She expected me to bow my head, hand over the fruits of my labor, and continue playing the role of the dutiful, sacrificial daughter. I thought about the housewarming party happening right now across town. I pictured Derek, playing the gracious host in a sprawling suburban home, surrounded by my aunts and uncles, accepting their praise for his success. I pictured Margaret, beaming with pride, holding court in a kitchen she hadn't paid a dime for. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto my face. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they could humiliate me, cast me aside, and then boldly demand a cut of my hard-earned empire to sustain their financial illusions. It was time to introduce them to the real Hazel. The morning sunlight filtering through my office's floor-to-ceiling windows did absolutely nothing to warm the ice that had settled in my veins overnight. I hadn't gone home to my apartment. I had slept, or rather, stared blankly into the darkness, on the sleek, uncomfortable mid-century modern sofa in my reception area. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the heavy glass door of my firm swung open. Scarlett marched in, balancing 2 massive cups of black coffee and a thick, red-tabbed leather binder. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting at my desk, still wearing my wrinkled emerald green dress, surrounded by the boxed-up remnants of my ruined launch party. "Hazel," Scarlett breathed, her sharp, professional demeanor softening instantly. She set the coffees down and hurried over. "What happened? Where is everyone? I got stuck at the courthouse yesterday, but I thought your family." She trailed off, her eyes sweeping over the empty champagne flutes I hadn't had the energy to pack away. I didn't say a word. I just unlocked my phone, opened the text message from Margaret, and slid the device across the polished surface of my desk. Scarlett picked it up. I watched as her eyes darted back and forth across the screen. The softening in her expression vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. Scarlett was a corporate litigator who ate hostile takeovers for breakfast. She did not tolerate bullies, and she especially did not tolerate Margaret. "She demands a cut of your profits," Scarlett read aloud, her voice dropping an octave. "While they were throwing a housewarming party for Derek, on the night of your launch." "Yes," I whispered, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "She wants me to draw up the paperwork today, to fund Derek's new mortgage, the mortgage on the H." "Ooze that I couldn't even finish the sentence. A hysterical, bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. Scarlett slammed the phone down and slammed her hands onto the desk, a fierce, triumphant grin spreading across her face. "Hazel, do you realize what this means? She actually thinks she has the upper hand. She has completely forgotten the leverage we hold." Scarlett reached for the thick, red-tabbed binder she had brought with her and dropped it onto my desk with a heavy, satisfying thud. I knew exactly what was inside. 6 months ago, Margaret had come to me sobbing, claiming Derek was going to lose the deposit on his dream home because the bank wouldn't approve his mortgage based on his non-existent influencer income. She had begged me to co-sign. I had initially refused, but Scarlett had proposed a brilliant, ironclad alternative strategy. I wasn't just a co-signer, I was the primary guarantor. Scarlett flipped the binder open to a specific page heavily marked with yellow highlighter. "Let's review the trap we set, shall we?" Scarlett said, her eyes gleaming. "Under Section 4B, the Business Protection Clause. We structured this guarantee so that your financial liability is strictly contingent upon your sole, unencumbered ownership of this firm. If Derek, or any representative acting on his behalf, meaning your mother, attempts to claim equity, demand profit sharing, or attach themselves to your business assets in any way, it constitutes a material breach of the guarantee agreement," I finished for her, the heavy fog in my brain finally beginning to clear. "And if the guarantee is breached, the bank immediately pulls the funding," Scarlett confirmed, tapping the page firmly. "The mortgage goes into immediate default. Derek will have 30 days to produce the entire remaining balance of the loan, or the house goes straight into foreclosure. They don't own that house, Hazel. You hold the strings. And by demanding your profits in writing, Margaret just handed you the scissors." A profound sense of power began to replace my sorrow, but I needed more. If I was going to pull the rug out from under them, I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. "Scarlett," I said, sitting up straighter, "I need to investigate Margaret's finances. She's been claiming my dad's pension isn't enough to cover their living expenses, but I see the clothes she wears. I see the vacations she takes. I want to hire a forensic accountant. I want to know where every single dime in that family has been going for the last 5 years." "Consider it done," Scarlett said, already pulling out her own phone to make the calls. "We are going to dismantle her completely." At precisely 1:00 p.m., the elevator doors in my lobby chimed, and Margaret and Derek strolled out. They didn't look like people coming to apologize for missing the biggest night of my life. They looked like royalty arriving to inspect their newly conquered territory. Margaret was wearing a cream-colored cashmere turtleneck and oversized designer sunglasses, exuding her usual disingenuous charm. Derek was trailing behind her, wearing limited-edition sneakers and holding a vlogging camera, lazily panning it across my reception area. "Wow, Hayes," Derek said, not bothering to greet me. "This place is massive, industrial chic, very trendy. I was thinking the corner office with the big windows, that would make an epic recording studio for my channel. The natural light is insane. I sat behind my desk, my hands folded neatly over the red-tabbed binder. Scarlett sat in the corner, a silent, intimidating sentinel with her legal pad ready. "You aren't getting an office here, Derek," I said, my voice eerily calm. Margaret sighed dramatically, removing her sunglasses and dropping into the leather chair opposite my desk. "Hazel, please, stop pouting about last night. We are a family, and families share their resources. Derek is a homeowner now. He has real responsibilities." She reached into her expensive leather tote bag and pulled out a cheap, generic contract she must have printed off the internet. "I've drafted a simple profit-sharing agreement. It stipulates that 30% of your net monthly revenue will be transferred directly to Derek's accounts to cover his mortgage and living expenses." She slid the flimsy piece of paper across my desk. I didn't even look at it. "No," I said simply. Margaret's pleasant facade cracked, revealing the furious, entitled woman beneath. "Excuse me? You listen to me, you selfish little girl. You would have nothing without this family. You will sign this paper, or I will ensure every aunt, uncle, and cousin we have knows exactly how greedy and ungrateful you are." "Mom," I said, leaning forward, holding her gaze, "does Derek know the truth about his mortgage?" Derek stopped fiddling with his camera. "What truth? Mom helped me with the paperwork. The bank loved my business plan." "The bank rejected your business plan." "And Derek," I stated clearly, my voice ringing in the quiet office. "You have no verifiable income. You didn't qualify for a credit card, let alone a $500,000 mortgage." "Hazel, shut your mouth," Margaret shrieked, half rising from her chair. Her face had gone entirely pale. I ignored her, pulling the thick, official mortgage documents from my binder and sliding them toward my brother. "I am the primary guarantor on your home, Derek. I backed the loan with my own personal assets. Mom begged me to do it, and she swore she would never tell you because it would hurt your pride." Derek stared at the documents, his eyes wide as he read his own name next to mine. I don't understand. Mom said I got approved on my own merit." "She lied to you," I said softly, feeling a tiny flicker of pity for him before the anger swallowed it whole. "And she made a massive mistake by demanding my profits today, because built into this contract is a protection clause." I tapped the highlighted section. "If anyone attempts to claim my business assets to fund your life, this guarantee is immediately voided. You are in material breach, Derek." "What does that mean?" he stammered, looking frantically between me and our mother. "It means," Scarlett spoke up from the corner, her voice like cracking ice, "that as of this morning, when your mother demanded 30% of this company in writing, the bank was notified. Your loan is in default. You have 30 days to pay off the house in full, or you are getting evicted." Margaret completely lost her composure. She slammed her hands onto my desk, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the wood. "You are lying. These are fake documents. You forged this. I will sue you, Hazel. I will take you to court for elder abuse. I will ruin your miserable little life." Her threats were sloppy, desperate, and completely devoid of legal standing. She was flailing, a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped shut. "You can't sue me for protecting my own assets, Mom," I said, leaning back in my chair, completely unfazed by her screaming. "Now take your fake contract and get out of my office." The fallout was immediate and vicious. By the following morning, my phone was a radioactive object. Margaret had gone on the offensive, weaving a massive, hysterical narrative and broadcasting it to the entire extended family. My voicemails were flooded with furious messages from my aunts and uncles, calling me a monster, accusing me of trying to render my own brother homeless out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. Through it all, the only voice missing was my father's. He was a quiet, hard-working man who had spent 40 years at a manufacturing plant. He had always let Margaret handle the finances because he hated conflict. I knew, deep down, that Margaret was keeping him in the dark. While the family raged, Scarlett and the forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Vance, spent 3 grueling days tearing through public records, credit histories, and the banking information I had legal access to as Derek's guarantor. On Thursday evening, Mr. Vance called us into a secure conference room. He projected a massive, horrifying spreadsheet onto the screen. "Your mother is not just entitled, Hazel," Mr. Vance said grimly. "She is running a domestic Ponzi scheme. She has secretly taken out 4 massive credit cards in your father's name. She forged his signature on a second mortgage on their family home to pay off Derek's failed sneaker business 3 years ago. Your father's pension is being entirely consumed by interest payments. They are, for all intents and purposes, completely bankrupt." The breath left my lungs. My father. My sweet, tired father, who thought he was enjoying a peaceful retirement, was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt he didn't even know existed. "And Derek?" Scarlett asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Derek is a pawn," Mr. Vance confirmed. "Margaret has been siphoning the leftover funds from his initial mortgage payout, money meant for home repairs, directly into her own personal checking account to fund her shopping habits. She convinced Derek she was managing his investments." The picture was devastatingly clear. Margaret hadn't just betrayed me, she was actively destroying the 2 men she claimed to love most. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just let the bank take the house. I had to break Margaret's spell over my family forever. I called my father. "Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I need you to come to my office, right now, and bring Derek. Don't tell Mom, just tell him it's an emergency." An hour later, my father walked into my office. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders stooped, a deep weariness in his eyes. Derek trailed behind him, looking terrified and lost without Margaret there to script his lines. "Hazel, what's going on?" my dad asked gently, taking a seat. "Your mother is practically tearing the house apart, saying you're trying to ruin us." I didn't say a word. I just slid the thick manila envelope across the desk. "Dad," I said softly, my heart breaking for the pain I was about to cause him. "Mom hasn't been managing the finances. She's been hiding them. Open it." My father's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope. He pulled out the credit reports. He pulled out the forged second mortgage documents. He stared at the signature that was a poor imitation of his own. I watched his eyes scan the highlighted numbers, the massive, insurmountable debts. This can't be right," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We paid off the house 10 years ago. We don't have credit cards." "You do, Dad," I said gently. "She opened them online. She's been hiding the statements in a P.O. box. And Derek—" I turned my gaze to my brother, who was staring over our dad's shoulder, his face completely drained of color. "Look at the bank transfer records on page 4. Derek flipped the page. He saw the systematic, weekly transfers from his mortgage repair escrow account directly into Margaret's personal, lifestyle consultant checking account. Thousands of dollars drained away to buy cashmere and expensive dinners. "She told me those were administrative fees for the bank," Derek choked out, his eyes wide with horror as the reality of his mother's deception finally crashed down on him. My father dropped the papers onto the desk. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just buried his face in his hands, releasing a long, agonizing sigh that sounded like a man whose entire world had just collapsed. The unwavering loyalty my father and brother had held for Margaret was gone, replaced by the devastating, irrefutable truth. The opportunity for a final, definitive confrontation arrived exactly 3 days later, orchestrated not by me, but by Margaret herself. Unaware of the devastating meeting that had taken place in my office, she had decided that the best way to handle my rebellion was to publicly shame me into submission. She called a mandatory, formal Sunday family dinner at her home. She invited Aunt Carol, Uncle Thomas, my cousins, and of course, Dad and Derek. Dad had called me Saturday night, his voice thick with a new, somber resolve. "Come to the dinner, Hazel," he had said quietly. "Bring the files, all of them. It ends tomorrow." When I pulled up to my parents' sprawling, immaculately manicured suburban home on Sunday afternoon, the driveway was already packed with the vehicles of my extended family. The sky was an overcast, slate gray, mirroring the heavy, suffocating tension that sat squarely in my chest. I sat in my car for a long moment, the engine turned off, listening to the absolute silence of the cabin. My hands rested on the steering wheel, right next to the thick, heavy leather binder I had brought from the office. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with air, and stepped out into the humid afternoon. The moment I pushed open the heavy oak front door and stepped into the grand foyer, the atmosphere shifted. The low hum of pleasant, familial chatter echoing from the formal dining room instantly ceased. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floors, the sound echoing like a ticking clock in the sudden, oppressive silence. I turned the corner and entered the dining room. It was a scene straight out of a lifestyle magazine. The long mahogany table was set with Margaret's finest china, gleaming crystal goblets, and an extravagant centerpiece of imported orchids. The spread of food was lavish, a massive roasted tenderloin, silver platters of artisanal cheeses, and expensive bottles of wine. Every single item in the room, I now knew with absolute certainty, was paid for by stolen money and fraudulent credit. Margaret sat at the head of the table, wearing a crisp, tailored silk blouse and her signature heavy gold necklace. As I walked in, her eyes narrowed into sharp, hostile slits. She offered no greeting. Aunt Carol, sitting to her right, crossed her arms over her chest, her face pinched in disapproval. "Well," Carol scoffed loudly, not bothering to hide her disdain, "I'm surprised you showed your face, Hazel, after what you've been trying to do to your brother. Frankly, we debated whether you should even be allowed in this house." I didn't look at Carol. I didn't look at the hostile faces of my cousins. I looked straight at Dad. He was sitting at the opposite end of the table from Margaret, staring down at his empty porcelain plate. He looked pale, but his jaw was set with a rigid, unyielding firmness I hadn't seen in decades. Next to him sat Derek, his posture entirely slouched, his eyes wide and anxious as they darted between me and our mother. "Sit down, Hazel," Margaret commanded, her voice dripping with artificial authority. "Since you are here, we are going to use this opportunity as a family to assess your recent behavior. We are going to discuss your obligations, your selfishness, and how we are going to fix the damage you've caused your brother's mental health." I walked slowly to the only empty chair, located squarely in the middle of the long table. I did not sit down. Instead, I placed the heavy, red-tabbed leather binder onto the polished mahogany surface. The heavy thud of the binder seemed to vibrate through the wood. "We aren't discussing my business today, Mom," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, steady, and loud enough to command the attention of every single person in the room. I felt a strange, absolute sense of detachment. The terrified, people-pleasing daughter who used to beg for this woman's affection was completely gone. "We are going to discuss yours." Margaret scoffed, a high, nervous sound, though she desperately tried to maintain her facade of control. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Sit down and stop making a scene." I opened the binder. I pulled out the first stack of papers, the forensic accountant's summary of her illicit accounts. "Aunt Carol," I said, sliding the stack of papers down the smooth surface of the table until it stopped right in front of her crossed arms. "You just mentioned what I'm doing to my brother. I think you should take a look at what your sister has been doing to my father." Carol looked down at the documents, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" "Those are the bank statements for 4 separate, high-yield credit cards," I explained, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "Cards that were opened online over the last 5 years. They have a combined balance of over $80,000. They are all in Dad's name, and he had absolutely no idea they existed until Thursday." A collective, sharp intake of breath circled the table. Uncle Thomas leaned over, snatching the papers from Carol's hands. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the highlighted numbers. The color began to drain from his face. "Hazel, you malicious little liar," Margaret shrieked. She slammed her hands onto the table, the china rattling violently. "Where did you get those?" Those are forged. She forged them because she's jealous. Thomas, don't look at that garbage. She reached out to grab the papers, but Dad stood up. The scraping of his wooden chair against the floor was the loudest sound in the world. "Leave them, Margaret," Dad said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a heavy, gravelly authority that instantly froze her in place. "David, please," Margaret stammered, her polished mask finally cracking into pieces of pure panic. "She's trying to turn you against me. She's trying to destroy our family because she's a bitter, greedy girl." I ignored her completely, reaching into the binder and pulling out the second stack of papers. The mortgage documents. "And this," I said, sliding them toward Uncle Thomas, "is the second mortgage she secretly took out on this house 3 years ago. She forged Dad's signature to get the cash to pay off Derek's failed sneaker company. Dad's pension is completely gone. It goes entirely to covering the interest payments on the debt she accumulated to buy silk blouses, vacations, and that gold necklace she's wearing right now." "That's not true," Margaret screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical, grating pitch. "I was managing our investments. I was providing a lifestyle for this family. I gave you everything. Derek, tell them. Tell them how much I've done for you." Margaret turned her desperate, wild eyes toward her golden child, fully expecting him to fall into line, to defend her as he had done his entire life. Derek stood up. He didn't look like an arrogant influencer anymore. He looked like a profoundly broken, exhausted young man. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own set of papers, the banking transfer logs I had given him in my office. He threw them onto the center of the table, right over the imported orchids. "You didn't do it for me, Mom," Derek said, his voice shaking with a mixture of profound grief and intense anger. "You told me you were helping me with my mortgage. You told me the bank was taking fees, but you were stealing from me. You were siphoning thousands of dollars out of my escrow account every single month to buy clothes." "Derek, no," Margaret whimpered, shrinking back into her chair as if she had been physically struck. "I was saving that money for you. I was protecting it." "You lied to me," Derek shouted, the years of manipulation finally shattering completely. "You made me think I was successful. You made me think I earned that house. But Hazel is the only reason I have it, and you tried to force her to pay for my life so you could keep stealing my money. You ruined Dad. You used me to ruin him." The entire table sat in stunned, horrified silence. Aunt Carol was openly weeping, holding her hand over her mouth. Uncle Thomas looked at Margaret. T with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The illusion of the grand, wealthy, perfect family was completely, permanently dead, scattered in paper across the dining room table. Dad walked slowly around the edge of the table. He didn't look at Margaret. He walked straight over to me, placed his large, calloused hands on my shoulders, and pulled me into a tight, grounding embrace. "I am so sorry, Hazel," he whispered into my hair, his voice breaking with emotion. "I should have paid closer attention. I should have protected you from her, but I am so incredibly proud of the woman you have become." He pulled back, turning to look down the length of the table at the woman he had been married to for nearly 40 years. Margaret was sobbing loudly, her face buried in her hands, entirely isolated at the head of the table. No one moved to comfort her. "Thomas," Dad said quietly to my uncle, "please gather your family and leave. The dinner is over. Margaret and I have a great deal of packing to do." The fallout from the Sunday dinner was swift, merciless, and entirely legal. Armed with the forensic evidence Mr. Vance had compiled, Scarlett orchestrated a masterclass in asset recovery and legal protection. Because Margaret had committed blatant, documentable wire fraud and identity theft against her own husband, Dad held all the power. Instead of pressing criminal charges and sending her to federal prison, a mercy she absolutely did not deserve, but one Dad insisted upon for the sake of his own peace, Dad used the threat of prosecution to force a completely uncontested divorce. Margaret was stripped of everything. Scarlett ensured that the family home, the grand suburban fortress Margaret had used to project her false status, was immediately put on the market. The profits from the sale were solely designated to pay off the massive mountains of debt she had accumulated in Dad's name. Margaret was left with virtually nothing. With the family completely turning their backs on her, Aunt Carol and Uncle Thomas refused to even answer her phone calls. She was forced to move into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The designer clothes were sold to pay her rent. The lavish vacations were gone forever. Her ultimate downfall wasn't just financial ruin. It was the total, suffocating social exile she now lived in, entirely devoid of the audience she so desperately craved. Derek, too, faced a harsh reality, but his trajectory was fundamentally different. Once the bank was officially notified of Margaret's attempt to attach my business assets to his mortgage, his loan indeed went into immediate default. He lost the house. It was a humiliating, painful process, but Scarlett brilliantly negotiated with the bank, arranging a rapid private sale of the property that covered the entirety of the outstanding loan, ensuring my credit remained completely untouched, and Derek avoided a formal foreclosure on his permanent record. For the first time in his life, my brother had no safety net, but the shattering of Margaret's control had fundamentally changed him. 3 weeks after the house was sold, Derek showed up at my office. He wasn't wearing limited edition sneakers or holding a vlogging camera. He was wearing a plain, slightly wrinkled polo shirt and heavy work boots. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of my bustling office, watching as my newly hired junior architects moved around the space. I invited him in, closing the glass door behind him. He sat down in the chair opposite my desk, nervously twisting a generic coffee cup in his hands. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. "I got a job, Hazel," he said quietly. "Full-time, at a logistics warehouse downtown. It's hard work, really hard, but the paycheck is mine." He paused, swallowing hard, his eyes filling with tears. "I am so sorry, for everything. For letting her use me, for never standing up for you, for taking your sacrifices for granted. You were the only one actually working, and I just stood by and let her tear you down." I looked at my brother. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but I also saw something else, a genuine, foundational humility that had never been there before. The golden child facade was gone, replaced by a real, struggling human being trying to rebuild his life from scratch. "I forgive you, Derek," I said softly, and I meant it. The heavy, dark resentment I had carried for him for years simply dissolved. It's going to take time to rebuild our relationship, but I am proud of you for getting that job. We spent an hour just talking, not about money or status, but about real things. When he left, there was a tentative, fragile, but profoundly real bridge built between us. Dad's recovery was the most beautiful part of the aftermath. With the house sold and the massive, crushing debts finally cleared, Scarlett helped him secure a small, comfortable, and deeply affordable condominium in a quiet neighborhood near my office. He had to take a part-time job at a local hardware store to supplement his remaining, fractured pension, but he didn't mind. He said he loved the routine. One evening, about 6 months after the grand opening disaster, I invited Dad over to my apartment for dinner. We sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life against the twilight sky. He looked healthier than he had in years. The deep, stress-induced lines around his eyes had softened, and his shoulders were relaxed. "You know, Hazel," Dad said, taking a sip of his tea and smiling softly at me. "For a long time, I thought peace meant just keeping the peace, letting her run everything to avoid the screaming. I didn't realize that true peace only comes when you finally stand up and demand the truth." He reached out and squeezed my hand. "You saved my life, kiddo, and you built a beautiful one for yourself." I smiled, squeezing his hand back, a deep, resonant warmth spreading through my chest. He was right. My life was beautiful. My architectural firm was thriving. The empty, mocking silence of that grand opening night had been entirely replaced by the chaotic, wonderful noise of ringing phones, passionate client meetings, and the hum of a successful business. I no longer spent my days seeking the approval of a woman incapable of giving it. I was no longer a resource to be harvested or a satellite revolving around someone else's ego. I was Hazel. I was the architect of my own life, and the foundation I had built was finally, permanently unbreakable.